All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really so excited to have all my sculptures at Duck Creek. As you heard, I grew up here on the South Shore of Long Island. I grew up in a town called Babylon. For a brief introduction to myself a little bit, when I was 13, I got really into Marxism, radical politics, and punk rock. These two things will be threads that kind of run through what I'm going through here. It comes back with the approach to the stone. But anyway, I moved to Brooklyn in 2002 to play in a band and to study cultural anthropology at Hunter College. And it's really like this interest in cultural anthropology and the history, our material history in the world, and what that means for us kind of creatively and spiritually, and how we can trace that through the way we engage with objects. I'm going to try and say two big things here. Stay with me, because we're gonna start 2 million years ago and we're going to come to the present. I'm going to give a lot of information. If it doesn't seem like you're following at first, just stay, and hopefully, I think I'm going to land us there together by the end. Aside from being a writer and a stone carver, I'm also a teacher. And when I introduce myself to my freshman classes, I introduce them in this way, as I'll say it to you, and then we'll kind of go on. But I always say math and science will teach you a lot about what the world is made of, but nothing about what it means. Meaning is the provenance of art. Life is suffering. Meaningless suffering is intolerable. If you are not participating in what your life means, somebody else is doing it for you. They're probably trying to sell you something or to steal your most vital energy and pay you a bargain basement rate for it. We're going to learn how to make meaning here together. And then I show them this picture. This rock is about 2 million years old. It was found in China. However, it's one of the first objects that we have from our history that was worked again and again and again. So you'll see chimpanzees in the wild today. They're going to find a rock, smash a piece of fruit, then throw the rock and eat the fruit. This stone had been found, obviously used for a purpose. Who's ever stoned this one realized that it was a special stone, and they held on to it and they brought it back the next day. Because it's been worked over and over again, we can see that it was cherished as an object and that this person brought it with them. I love this stone not because it's a formal revelation and they've shaped the stone in some exciting way, but because the way they were using the stone tells us something about how the person saw themselves. Slide, please.
Oh yeah, we're really homespun.
Okay, we're almost there. Okay. Anyway, slide, please. Chopper stone, also about 1.5 million years old. Going to put it forward here, not humans. These are proto-humans, not hominoid, but as we can see, there's a bit more intention from the last one. This stone had been shaped, all the sides had been knocked off, so it has this sharp edge. Slide, please. Something about all of the people who have been shaping and making these stones, like all large primates on Earth now, from chimpanzees to gorillas, all of our ancestors, Neanderthal, Homo erectus, Australopithecus, all of their groups were about 30 to 70 individuals. That remains true today of all large primates except for us and all of our ancestors. So they are shaping these stones in these new ways. They're thinking about themselves in some different way than the other creatures that we know. But slide, please. This stone was made by a Neanderthal. This is our closest living relatives. This is, think about a Nerf football. This is, if you look at the way that the stone is shaped, there's obviously some new intention here. They have like come up with this beautiful sort of like ovide shape to it. And they are spending more time flaking these things off to get to this sharp point. Slide, please. However, they never made a tool that was really smaller than this. And their group size never grew from about 30 to 70 individuals. This was something made by a human being. We know that because this object is about this big. And this would have been tied to a stick. Slide, please. Something that's different in what our stone tools were that none of the other hominin creatures were able to do were we took tools and we put them to, you take two different tools and put them together, you have technology. So if you see anything that has a hole in it that was maybe attached to a stick, you know it wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't Homo erectus, you know that this was made by a human being. Slide, please. So human beings, long, big things, and a lot of information. We, as modern humans, have been here for about 300,000 years, shaping stones the whole time. Our groups were around 30 to 70 individuals, like all other large primates. 60,000 years ago, this object was created. And it's the first time that you see representation. It's the first time that you see symbols. The difference in the stones I was showing earlier, where you take two different things, put them together, you get technology. When you, this is, I would say, evidence of the first sort of like symbolic technology. The first stone I showed you, I was thinking about it as a way of, the way that that shape was formed tells us something about the way that stone tells us about that individual was thinking about themselves. Now when you get to a place where they're representing other individuals, this is telling us something different about the way that we think about each other. At the time when these began to appear, our group, the human groups, were able to grow from about 30 to 70 individuals to 100 to 200 to 300 individuals. It's the presence of symbols, it's the presence of us representing ourselves and representing each other that allows us to start to live together in community. Slide, please. This object is about 5,000 years old. It's an early technology, stone integrated into, slide, please. And slide, please. This, at the same time that the Venus figure was formed, we began to see painting, sculpture, clothing, domestication of the dog, cities. Slide, please. You start to see about this, and one more slide, please. This is Urfa man. This is the first example of a human figure carved in stone. When this is about 11,000 years old, it was found in Turkey. When I'm thinking about the timescale of where we are now and where we were, if we started 300,000 years ago, and then 70,000 years ago we begin to make figurines, 10,000 years ago we begin to represent the human figure in stone, it's actually very close to where we are now. Slide, please. This sculpture, everyone will recognize it as coming from ancient Egypt, is carved in granite. It's about 6,000 years old. Slide, please. You guys have been to the Cycladic section at the Metropolitan Museum of Art? This is my favorite object from that collection. When the sculpture in the previous slide, can we go back? When this sculpture is being made in Egypt, go forward, this is what the sculptures that were being made in ancient Greece looked like. I love that because when we're studying sculpture now and we're looking at stone carving, we think about ancient Greece as having really stone carving sort of emerging out of that culture. But I love this because it's so close, actually, to that sculpture that was made 80,000 years ago, that original Venus sculpture. And to know that that tradition carried on so long, and even in the place where we think is sort of the birthplace of modern stone carving, that this is as far as they had come even 5,000 years ago. These guys are making these sculptures and begin traveling to Egypt and looking at that granite sculpture that we saw before. Next slide, please. And this is an example of the first stone carvings of human figures at scale that are coming out of Greece. If you look at the position of the figure with the hands at the side and the feet 1 footstep forward, it's an exact reference to what they were making there in Egypt. The main difference here in this sculpture is that they've broken through the space in the leg and also broken through these spaces in the arms. The Egyptian sculptors never got to that place, but it's not because they were terrible sculptors. It's because their material was just too hard. They were carving granite, and the Greeks just so happened to live on top of this huge mountain of this really soft, beautiful, supple marble. And it was this advance that they were able to make, which was really a result of the quality of the stone, really allows them to progress their sculpture. The Egyptians kept carving in the same way. Next slide, please. And we start to see there's still a holding on to this classic form. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. All of these, next slide, please. So the Greek sculptors begin to pull the arms begin to like lift and the legs begin to move. Next slide, please. And within a very short period of time. So from that Venus figure that was made in marble until this is a matter of a few hundred years. But we can see within first beginning in the greater expression of the forms, but then also the content of what is being represented is an indicator to us of like the further development of the culture. Next slide, please. So thank you for, it was a lot, but we're getting up to the present day. So the sculpture that was just before was made in ancient Greece. These sculptures were carved in Europe just coming after that. This period, which would be known as the Gothic period. In some way, there was like a reduction in form where they had become very grandiose and almost Baroque in the sculpture. This, in some way, you almost feel like they have lost some of their ability to be like vivacious and to bring movement into the sculpture. Next slide, please. And this is a sculpture by Michelangelo, as we all may know. But this sculpture was made really essentially 500 years ago. There had been, in the world that Michelangelo grew up in, most of what he was seeing and was being carved at the time was in the Gothic era. But as he's coming of age, they start to dig up all of these ancient sculptures which had sort of been lost, and he's looking to them. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Jackson Pollock. Anyway, I'm gonna stop this first point now. I'm gonna sit down and we'll have another course, and then we can pick up with Jackson Pollock. Is that okay? Great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you, my lovely audience, for sticking with me through this whole thing. And all these slides and the history I've been bringing, I'm really going to try and bring us all together and make a clear point here. That first stone that I showed you when I was talking about really the wear that we saw on that stone showed us something about a new way that the possessor of that stone was thinking about themselves. And when we start to carve figures in stone, it's starting to tell us something new about the way that we're thinking about each other. I put this slide up to show really when these images of Pollock hit Life magazine, the big change that it brought to us wasn't a formal change in terms of what the paintings were going to look like, but when we see the image of the artist in the process of making the work, because photography gets introduced into our life, it opens the scope of the way that we are engaging our bodies in the world and the documentation of that can say a new thing about how we engage with our world is saying something about the inner life that we are having. After this image of Pollock, next slide please, you start to see a whole new genre of work produced, which came to be known as really like conceptual art or performance art. But because we're able to see these moments which would have maybe been like lost or very quiet moments, a very personal practice can start to say something really about our inner life and express that out to a much larger audience. Next slide, please. This slide for Chris Burden. I'm going to just go through a few of these performances. This was the first work that when I was a young punk rocker moved to New York City and started to get a taste of the art world a little bit. When I saw this artwork, I was like, I can do this. A person just putting their physical body in the line of some experience, I can commit myself to something crazy. I could come up with an idea that seems it's a little bit beyond my reach of what I'll feel comfortable doing and push myself to do it. This piece is called Shoot. The Vietnam War was going on, and Chris Burden stood in a gallery in Los Angeles and had a friend shoot him through the arm. Kids his age were really being shot on the battlefield. I thought it was so beautiful. There's the poetry of your life that can be expressed in these small moments. Next slide, please. This actually started here on the East Coast. This artist's name is Bastian Otter. He attempted a single-handed sail across the Atlantic, and his ship was lost in the middle of the boat washed up a few months later. This is why I had to get out of performance art, guys, because you just want to go just a little bit over. You have to keep raising the stakes, and eventually we lose some of them. Next slide, please. This is this beautiful piece of Ulay and Marina Abramovic. They walked from opposite sides of the Great Wall of China and met in the middle. They thought that they would get married, and they decided to break up at the end of that trip. Next slide, please. These two artists stayed tied together at the waist for a year in New York City. Next slide, please. This one really got me excited. This is Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. They went to the New York City Stock Exchange and threw like 500 single-dollar bills over the ledge. Trading stopped as all of the traders flocked for the money, grabbing for it, and it was the only time that the market had stopped trading during the day. This type of subtle action and poetry that one could just throw themselves into, I was like, sign me up, I'm here for this. Next slide, please. But it's not, although this is a new, starting with in the 50s with Pollock and all of this performance art that came out of it, in some way, it seemed like something brand new, but it maybe harkened back to something older. This is a representation of Diogenes. He was like an ancient Greek philosopher who was famous for walking around in the forum with a lamp during the middle of the day. And when they asked him, "What are you doing?" he said he was looking for a wise man. This, you know, there's something of the performance art about it. Next slide. Obviously, St. Francis of Assisi. I'm sort of drawing a distinction between, or just kind of finding a place where we always end up with an object that we think of as art. We end up with a painting or a sculpture, and we think about the final product. But this sort of like call back to performance, really locating, really saying the way that something is made is what the artwork is about. Next slide, please. Joseph Beuys lived with this wolf lived with this coyote in a gallery in New York City. Next slide, please. John Ruskin. I don't know if any of you have read John Ruskin. I know there are a lot of art fans in the crowd. However, when I really got into stone carving, Ruskin like completely blew my mind. The sculptures that I have up at Duck Creek right now, the show I have is called Direct Carving. We're saying that is as something alternate to, instead of making a model and then scaling that model up into the stone, I just get a block of stone and I just start carving right into it. Next slide, please. So Ruskin wrote this beautiful book called The Stones of Venice. I recommend it to anyone, especially if you're going to Venice. However, at the time that Ruskin was alive, everyone was obsessed with neoclassical sculpture. So he's like walking around London and everyone's looking to Rome and to Greece and to these perfect anatomical representations. And they had a poor opinion of all of their own Gothic and Byzantine sculpture that they have around them. And Ruskin looks at these sculptures. Next slide, please. And he says that the sculptors who are making these sculptures are enslaved in a way. They're enslaved to the perfection. They're enslaved to having to the work only succeeding if it's an exact mimic of the thing that's trying to be represented. Next slide, please. Ruskin looks at this and he says, when I look at these sculptures, I can see that the artists making these are completely free. Every single, when you look at a Gothic cathedral, every corner and every gargoyle is a unique object that is an expression of the inner feeling of the artist. So the person who's carving that isn't only succeeding if they're directly copying what there is in front of them, but they're allowed to express themselves through that. And that really broke the door open for a whole revivification of the school of direct carving. Next slide, please. This guy's name is Adrian Stokes. I couldn't find a bigger picture of that one. However, big picture, 300,000 years, 60,000 years, the figurine. If we didn't start carving sculptures at monumental or human scale until like 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. You don't see an abstract carving at monumental scale really until like 100 years ago. It was a new thing. All sculpture had been representational. As abstraction comes into painting and architecture, the artists were trying to figure out what is abstraction going to mean for stone carving. And this guy, Adrian Stokes, came up with all the language for that. Next slide, please. This is from a cathedral in a city in Italy called Rimini. But he was looking at this. This is actually the first sculpture. This is actually the first sort of like anatomical Greco representation after the Dark Ages. So this is the first sculpture of Hercules after they began to look back. Next slide, please. But he also begins to talk about how do we talk about abstraction when it comes into stone carving. He invited Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth to go down to Cornwall, and they started this whole school of sculpting, which is known as the direct carving school. And really what he was pointing to was sculptors had access to these shops where you could send a small clay model and have it scaled up into stone. Next slide, please. This is Barbara Hepworth. We love her. If you ever end up in England, her studio is in Cornwall. It's absolutely worth the trip. Next slide, please. So this is a marble Rodin sculpture. You may have, you could go to the Louvre and see a marble Rodin. However, Rodin himself did not carve this sculpture. Rodin made a small clay model, sent it to a stone carving facility, and had it scaled up. Most of the neoclassical or figurative sculpture you see on your banks and your public buildings were made in that way. They weren't actually carved by the sculptor. The sculptor thought of himself more as a composer making this form, and then it gets scaled up. All of the sculptors that had sort of worked for Rodin, however, next slide please, Constantine Brancusi, who did work in his studio, when they're going through this change from sort of the 1800s into the modern age, and they're trying to figure out what can sculpture be, what can it mean, what is it going to be different, they went back to the artists actually engaging with the stone with their own hands. So every Brancusi sculpture that you've ever seen, that sculpture had been carved by the artist's hand and hand polished by the artist. The bronzes had been cast by him and polished by him. In this way, locating the art, not in just conceiving of the form, but actually engaging with the material itself. Adrian Stokes. I love older art critics because they have hyperbolic and very strong ideas. I don't hold this position, but I love what a strong position he took. And he really is saying, he really made a distinction between carving values and modeling values. So he was saying that he was into psychoanalysis. He said he thought that clay was pervertedly soft. He was like, it accepts your fantasy too much. You can just think of anything you want and just push it into this mush. He's like, a block of stone, you're going to come at this block of stone with intention. It already has its inner character. It has these fissures. You move at it with something you think that you want. It's only going to give you what it wants to get, and you're going to negotiate that with the stone. He was like, what is life more like? Is life more like a lump of clay that you just push into any form that you want it to be? Or is life more like a block of stone? You head at it with something you're hoping it's going to be. It comes back at you with all of these things you didn't even know were inside of it. And in the end, you get your negotiation. And that is more like what is life is like. And this is really the idea behind direct carving. Next slide, please. Noguchi, obviously, we love. If you haven't been to the Noguchi Museum in Long Island City, worth checking out. Hung out in Brancusi's studio, direct carver. We love Noguchi. Next slide, please. Brancusi, as we know. Next slide, please. Jacob Epstein, are we familiar with the sculptor? Anyway, born on the Lower East Side, but really had his whole career in Europe. I love Jacob Epstein, and to see these sculptures really set me free because the Brancusi sculptures are about as big as this, stones that you can carry, and he really went in this abstract direction. But this sculpture is about 9 feet tall. To endeavor to direct carve human figures non-representationally, so to go at this scale, but in a more abstracted form, there's really just not that many of them in the world. And Jacob Epstein really kind of took us there. You'll see some of my sculptures later, or if you go to Duck Creek, which I really encourage you to do, and you'll see why these sculptures really got me so excited. Next slide, please. Part of the reason why we don't understand this about what Brancusi's work did, or direct carving in general, is because when we came to learn about what this sculpture meant in America, we got it through, Duchamp was Brancusi's dealer. So Duchamp's telling everyone that Brancusi's work is about the relativity of form. It's just about breaking people's expectations and shredding the bourgeois expectations. It wasn't really what Brancusi was about. Next slide, please. And the question remains, is this the greatest sculpture of the last 100 years? I was getting my MFA at Yale in 2009, and the predominant theory was that it absolutely was. but perhaps things are changing. Next slide, please. And this is bringing us up to where we are today. This is a sculpture by Barry X. Ball. If you go to museums and galleries now, and you're seeing contemporary work, like 98% of the stone carving you're seeing is being carved by a robotic arm. Ball went to Italy, brought a huge rig, scanned all of Bernini's sculptures, and then is having a robotic arm print them into fine stones that he's finding around the world. No judgment, just not what we're into. Next slide, please. Also carved by a robotic arm. Interesting, whenever you polish a stone, it looks great. But what does it say? In some way, it's to make a lump of clay of stone to just model a form and then print it into it. I'm not judgmental about what anyone does in their life, but perhaps you're missing the greatest part of working with stone if you don't actually get your hands on the stone itself. I always say that, you could climb to the top of a mountain. You could take a helicopter to the top of a mountain. You could argue that the view is the same, but perhaps the whole point of climbing a mountain is halfway up, you think you're completely out of gas, but then you find a well of energy somewhere inside of you. You push yourself to the top, and you're a different person when you get out there, and it does actually look different. Beautiful in the helicopter, but perhaps there's still value in the climb. Next slide, please. Just another example of what is to be found, and the next slide, please. And this is me with this was my first direct carving at scale. The sculpture is called The Return, but we call him Connie. He's not at Duck Creek, but his siblings are. And the next slide, please. And this sculpture is called Swan Blossom. I carved it up in Vermont last summer. It was my first abstract sculpture at human monumental scale. And this sculpture can be found at Duck Creek.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
How long did it take you to carve this?
Yeah, so we're meeting each other at a really exciting time in my life. As I was carving all of the work that you'll see at Duck Creek, I was also tending bar 20 hours a week. So I was like making all of this work, but I only had like half my time. So on the occasion of having this show that was up in New York this summer, I am out from behind the bar. Life dream, I promised myself I'd be out by 40, and I'll be 42 in November, so it was pretty damn close. But that being said, I think it's probably about 6 months, something like that. This sculpture probably took about 6 months. Next slide, please. Swan Blossom, this was 33 12-hour days. I know it because I was on a residency, and I just did it every single day. And really, in some way, when you're finishing a piece, like to polish this sculpture, Swan Blossom, can we go back one? Probably took the same time as it did just to polish the hand on this sculpture. Stone is funny where if you scale the tool up, it's not actually that much work to get bigger, but it's really like to articulate in between all of these fingers and to get in there is really where a lot of the work is. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you so much for coming here. And for the food was delicious. Thank you everyone for helping and for the whole Almond crew. Does anybody else have any questions about anything? I make myself available. Not required.
Can you just go to Duck Creek even if it's not open? Can you go wander around
Yeah.
and just see it?
Dawn to dusk every day.
Dawn to dusk, any day. Yeah.
It's not exactly a question, but I saw you speak at Duck Creek, and when you talk about what makes marble up, I thought that was really interesting.
I'll talk about it. You know, most artists you know probably have something big that they're trying to say, and it's hard to get it, the whole big thought out really quick. But something that got me so excited about carving stone. I get all of my marble and most of the big pieces that you'll see at Duck Creek, all the marble comes from Vermont. There's actually a beautiful vein of marble that runs from Vermont all the way down to North Carolina. We may not know that. If you ever hang out in Inwood, up in the top of Manhattan, you can see veins of that vein of marble running all the way down. The question was, what is marble? Tell us about the meat, the substance of this stuff that you love so much. So, and this is true of all the marble in your kitchen or your bathroom or a sculpture that you love at the museum. The white stuff of marble, the meat of it, are the skeletal remains of the earliest life here on Earth. So we're on this coastline here. The northeast of America has kissed into West Africa and Scotland 4 times since the Earth formed. 2 times ago, there was a crazy coral reef that ran from Vermont all the way down to North Carolina. There were beds of clams and oysters and seashells and tiny microscopic shrimp. And as all those early creatures formed here, and over millions of years, their skeletons would sink down to the bottom of the sea. They get crushed and pushed down. And then you have this silty layer. This is what all the white stuff is. It's actually the bodies of the earliest life here on Earth. And all of the veins that you see in marble, when you cook vegetables in the earth, they turn into charcoal. So it's really like there would have been a storm here, maybe like 3 million years ago, and some trees blew into the bay. And those trees sunk down into the silty layer. And when they get pushed down into the earth and cooked, the white stuff crystallizes and the tree branches turn into black veins in your marble. So when you look at a piece of marble in your home, you're actually seeing the ancient forest that was here and the earliest life. You know, you get a stone carver talking about stone, he'll get excited about it. Anybody else have any questions?
Where was your residency in Vermont that you could work for?
Oh man, it's so good. If you know any sculptors, it's called the Vermont Carving Studio and Sculpture Center. Vermont actually had one of the most robust stone industries in the world. Before like in 1900, there was more marble coming out of Vermont than there was coming out of Italy. All the skyscrapers built between 1900 and 1920, they fronted those things with marble, actually, which is an insane, decadent thing to do. God bless them. All the headstones in Arlington National Cemetery come from Vermont. Most of the National Mall is all Vermont marble. In West Rutland, however, the first quarry went in. West Rutland, Vermont Carving Studio and Sculpture Center. Go check them out. It's like, you can go to Italy and sign up and you'll get a little like bench with a exhaust hose and a pneumatic hammer, and you could go all over Italy. They have residencies like that. There's only 2 in the United States and 1 is in Vermont. So it's actually a great resource that we have for any stone curious people out there, but I'll warn you, it's addictive. Yeah.
Do you just do like hammer and chisel, or do you use?
Yeah, you know, my heaviest. The question was, do you just use hammer and chisel, or do you use any power tools? My heaviest tool is an angle grinder. It's a 9-inch angle grinder, which you would see even Brancusi used. Really, the distinction is amongst stone carvers isn't, are you using power tools or not? It's, are you making a model and attempting to transfer this into the stone, or are you just carving into the stone and letting like the internal crystalline structure of the stone and its own grain and natural fissures decide what the final form is going to be? And that's really where I've sort of landed with all of these sculptures. Anybody else?
If someone wanted to carve out of stone, but they've never done it before,
Yeah.
and they probably aren't terribly artistic in general, what would someone need to get in order to do it like in their
Awesome question, and I'll save you a month of anxiety. First, get a piece of alabaster. Alabaster. Alabaster, also a sedimentary stone, but it's so soft. So it's marble and granite here. Can I talk for like 2 more minutes? Are we over time? Okay. Anyway, all of your stones in the world are going to be mostly 2 kinds. You're going to have your sedimentary stone. That was the bottom of the ocean and then got pushed down. So it's shells and coral reef crushed together. This is going to be relatively soft. Granite, which the base of this is, was lava that then cooled and hardened. Anytime you have a liquid and then it cools, you get crystals inside. Granite's really hard because it's just like formed by crystals inside. You can't carve it, you can only smash it. Alabaster has the structure of marble, but it's just much softer. So you're gonna have so much more fun getting in there, and then you're gonna be like, why am I ever gonna do marble? And you're gonna make like 5 alabaster sculptures. You're gonna spend a month carving this cat, and then you're gonna hit the chisel into it one day and the head's gonna fall off, and you're gonna say, it's too soft, and then you'll start carving marble again, and you'll realize that our ancestors learned to love marble because it's just hard enough to take a polish and to be able to move, but it's a Goldilocks of a stone in a way. But for a beginner carver, I would say call Trow and Holden. Oh my God, just text me, get my number from Jess. When the marble industry started in Vermont in like the 1870s, these guys moved from Carrara and Piera Satra in Italy. They moved to Barre, Vermont, started a foundry, and they started making incredible chisels. They're still making them there in that way. Also, if you're in Vermont, the most incredible goth date you will ever go on is to go to Barre, Vermont and go to the cemetery, because the guys that started the industry there, they would work all day carving, architectural adornment, and they'd go home and carve their own headstones. Oh yes, they did. And the stuff from like the 1800s, you get your angels and your crucifixes. When it's like the 50s, the 60s, there are like granite lazy boys, airplanes taking off out of clouds. Just the most incredible headstones, sculptures, period, that you'll ever see in your life. Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right. Pull it back together.